"Mom, your legs aren't what they used to be. You should just stay home and get some rest." The voice of my daughter-in-law, Lauren, came from outside the door, accompanied by the crisp sound of a key turning in the lock. I stood in the middle of the living room, still holding the travel bag I had just packed. Inside were the 3 sets of clothes I had carefully prepared for this family trip, along with sunscreen and that wide-brimmed straw hat. "Lauren, my legs are just fine." I tried to make my voice sound light, but my fingers were already tightening unconsciously on the bag's strap. "The doctor at my checkup last week said my bone age is like a 50-year-old's. From outside the door came my son Daniel's hushed voice. "Mom, there's a lot of walking in Miami. Don't push yourself." Then came the sound of suitcase wheels rolling, and my grandson Leo's excited shout, "Grandma, hurry up, or we'll miss our flight." My heart clenched. 3 months ago, my son and his family planned this trip to Miami, specifically choosing the time before the summer break ended, saying they wanted to take both Leo and me to see the ocean. I was so happy I couldn't sleep well for several nights, secretly looking up travel guides online and even learning how to download the Uber app, just so I wouldn't be a bother to the kids. "Daniel, Mom is really okay. I promise I won't slow you down," I said, walking quickly to the door. My hand was on the doorknob when I heard a click. The door had been locked from the outside. I froze, twisting the handle again in disbelief. It wouldn't budge. "Daniel? Lauren?" My voice began to tremble. You locked the door." My phone vibrated. It was a message from Lauren. "Mom, we're worried about your legs. We're afraid you might fall. Miami is so crowded we just can't risk it. We've stocked the fridge with 5 days' worth of meals. Get some rest, and we'll bring you back a gift." I stared at the phone screen, the words stinging my eyes like needles. So they had planned this all along. They had decided to leave me at home from the very beginning. Their so-called concern was just a flimsy excuse to hide their annoyance. I took a deep breath and, with trembling fingers, replied, "Thank you." Then I silently dialed the number for the building manager. "Hello. Is this Mr. Henderson? This is Eleanor from apartment 502. My voice was surprisingly calm. "I'd like to inquire about the emergency services provided for seniors living alone." After hanging up, I slowly slid to the floor. In my 63 years, I had never felt a pain so sharp. It wasn't the ache in my knees or the strain in my lower back. It was the pain of my heart being torn apart. Outside the window, the sound of my son's family laughing and talking faded into the distance. I used the wall to pull myself up and walk to the balcony, just in time to see them pulling their suitcases toward the entrance of the apartment complex. Leo skipped ahead, while my son and daughter-in-law walked side by side. Not a single one of them looked back at the 5th-floor window. I counted. From the moment they walked out of the building until they completely disappeared from my sight, it took exactly 27 steps. In 27 steps, my family had walked out of my life. Back in the living room, I turned on the television, letting the sound fill the empty apartment. A travel show was playing, featuring blue seas, clear skies, and coconut trees, the very scenery of Miami Beach. I turned the TV off and suddenly laughed out loud. How ironic. I, Eleanor, had worked hard my whole life, raised my son, helped him buy a house and get married, and raised my grandson, only to be locked in my own home like a piece of old, unwanted furniture. I walked into my son's room. It was neat and tidy. On the wall above his bed hung a crayon drawing I had helped him with when he was in elementary school. He was so attached to me back then. The first thing he would say after coming home from school was always, "Mom, I'm hungry." When did he start calling me Mom instead of Mama? When did his eyes stop holding that look of dependence and instead show a subtle tolerance? The kitchen refrigerator was indeed full of food, but it was all pre-made meals that I had to heat up myself. Lauren knew I didn't like using the microwave, always feeling that it destroyed the food's nutrients, yet she had still prepared so many frozen dinners. This wasn't care. It was a perfunctory gesture. I took out my phone and scrolled through my contacts to the name of Chris, the real estate agent. Last year, several old neighbors in the complex had sold their homes and moved into senior living communities. Chris had come by and left his business card. At the time, I had laughed and said my son was so devoted, I would never need it. The call connected. "Hello, is this Chris? This is Eleanor from 502. I'd like to know about the current housing market. Yes, it's very urgent. It would be best if we could start showing the apartment tomorrow. After hanging up, I dialed another number. Hello, my dear old friend. It's me. Is there still a vacancy at that senior living community you mentioned? I'd like to go see it. After making the calls, I sat on the sofa and looked around the home I had lived in for 20 years. The walls were covered with photos of my grandson from infancy to now. The cabinet displayed all the trophies my son had won. Every detail in the kitchen was designed with my daughter-in-law's cooking habits in mind. This home was filled with their traces, but there was no place for me, Eleanor. I was just the family's housekeeper, ATM, and temporary babysitter. The next morning, Mr. Henderson, the building manager, arrived with a locksmith. Seeing my swollen eyes, he didn't ask any questions, just gently patted my shoulder. Eleanor, are you sure you want to do this, mister? Henderson asked quietly as he watched the locksmith remove the old lock. I nodded. You know, my husband passed away early. I raised Daniel all by myself, put him through college, helped him with the down payment on his first home. Even the money for his wedding was from my retirement savings. My voice was calm, as if I were telling someone else's story. But I never expected that the old saying about raising children, to care for you in your old age, would turn into being abandoned by them. Mr. Henderson sighed. Does Daniel know you're planning to sell the apartment? They're in Miami right now, enjoying a vacation without me, I said with a small smile. 5 days. That's enough time for me to get everything done. The locksmith installed the new lock and handed me 2 keys. The cold touch of the metal reminded me of the joy I felt 30 years ago when I first held the keys to this home. Daniel was only 10 then, and my husband was still alive. We had saved every penny to buy this apartment in a good school district, all so our son could attend a good school. Eleanor, if you need any help at all, just call me, Mr. Henderson said before he left. I thanked him, closed the door, and began to pack. I didn't have much, really. A few sets of clothes I wore often, some old photographs with sentimental value, and a few books my husband had left behind. I'd leave the rest for the new owner. At noon, Chris brought a potential buyer, a young couple. The woman was pregnant, and looking at the sunlight streaming into the master bedroom, she said it would be perfect for a nursery. I suddenly remembered how, 30 years ago, my husband and I had looked at this same apartment, full of hope, planning Daniel's future. Ma'am, you've kept this place in wonderful condition. We're very happy with it, the young husband said. We'll agree to your asking price and can pay in full. We can close whenever you're ready. I nodded. I can be out by tomorrow. In the afternoon, I visited the senior living community. My old friend Margaret showed me the room. It was a 1-bedroom apartment, south-facing, with a small balcony. Downstairs were the community clinic and the activity center. Eleanor, are you really sure about this? Margaret looked at me with concern. Does Daniel know? He will, I said calmly. When he gets back, he'll find out that his mother isn't a piece of old furniture you can just lock away. That evening, I lay on the sofa. My phone lit up with a picture of a Miami sunset sent by Lauren. The caption read, Mom, the view here is beautiful. We'll definitely bring you next time. I didn't reply. I just silenced my phone, rolled over, and thought about how tomorrow the moving truck would arrive. 5 days later, when Daniel and his family returned, full of joy, and found that their key no longer worked, they would realize that the mother who had once loved them unconditionally had finally learned to love herself. The moving company arrived half an hour earlier than scheduled. I stood at the door, watching 2 young men efficiently load my few boxes onto the truck. In truth, after 63 years of life, what was truly worth taking with me amounted to so little. Ma'am, you're not taking any of this furniture? One of the movers asked, pointing at the living room sofa. No, I shook my head. I had bought that leather sofa 3 years ago for $3,000. Lauren had said she wanted a sophisticated living room to entertain guests. Thinking back now, none of those guests had ever been my friends. After the last box was carried out, I stood in the middle of the empty living room. Sunlight cast clear geometric shapes on the floor through the windows. This place had once been so full of life. There was always a fruit platter on the coffee table, The TV stand was covered with family photos, and a small blanket I had knitted for my grandson was always draped over the sofa. Now, all that was left was the wall calendar, still turned to the page for August 25th, the day my son and his family left for Miami. I walked over, took the calendar down, and tucked it into my cloth bag. "Ma'am, everything's loaded. Do you want to ride with us?" the moving company's supervisor asked. "No, that's all right. You can go ahead. I have a few things to take care of. I wrote down my new address and the phone number for the senior community's management office for them. Just leave the boxes by the door. My friend Margaret will keep an eye on them." Once the moving truck drove away, I went to the community office. Mr. Henderson was organizing files. When he saw me, he immediately put down his work. "Eleanor, are you really sure?" he asked, handing me a glass of warm water. "Maybe you should reconsider. You're family, after all." "Mr. Henderson, do you know how I've lived these past few years?" I asked, holding the warm glass. In the steam, memories flashed before my eyes. When Daniel got married, I gave them $40,000 for the wedding, emptying my savings. After Leo was born, I went to their house every morning to take care of him and came back so tired my back ached. When Lauren wanted to change cars, I even sold the gold watch my late husband left me. Mr. Henderson listened in silence, his expression complicated. "Last week at my checkup, I found out I have early-stage cataracts. The doctor recommended surgery as soon as possible. I mentioned it to Daniel, and he said, 'Mom, the hospital wait lists are so long right now. We'll take you when we have time.' I gave a bitter laugh. But then they turned around and took vacation time to go to Miami, locking me in the house." "Eleanor," Mr. Henderson started, but couldn't find the words. "I'm not here for sympathy," I said, putting down the glass. I took a file out of my bag. "This is a copy of the property transfer document. I need the community to have it on file. Also, this is my new address and phone number. If there's any mail or anything else, please forward it." Leaving the office, I walked slowly through the neighborhood, greeting familiar neighbors. Old Mr. Liu was walking his golden retriever. "Eleanor," he said, "I hear you're moving. Does Daniel know?" "He'll find out," I said, smiling as I petted the dog's head. "From now on, if you're ever short a player for poker, you can come find me at the senior community." At the entrance to the complex, I turned and looked back at the place I had called home for 20 years. The familiar windows, the paths I had walked countless times, the trees that had witnessed me age from middle age to old. There wasn't much sadness, just a strange sense of release. A taxi took me to the senior community on the other side of the city. Margaret was already waiting for me in the lobby. My few boxes were neatly stacked by the door to my new room. "It's all arranged," she said, helping me push the boxes inside. "The cafeteria is making your favorite pot roast for dinner tonight, and there's a craft class in the evening. I signed you up for flower arranging." The room was brighter and more spacious than I had imagined. Simple furniture, a clean bathroom, and even 2 potted plants on the small balcony. I placed my husband's photograph on the bedside table, hung my few clothes in the closet, and in less than half an hour, all my worldly possessions were settled. "So, what do you think? Are you satisfied?" Margaret asked, sitting on my newly made bed. I looked around and nodded. "It's very nice. At least everything here is my own choice." That evening, I attended the welcome dinner at the community. About 20 seniors sat around a long table, introducing themselves and sharing their stories. There were retired teachers, former corporate executives, and ordinary workers. Here, our pasts were simplified into a few keywords. What mattered was that now, we had all chosen to live our later years with independence and dignity. After dinner, I actually went to the flower arranging class. The teacher was an elegant woman in her 70s, a former university art professor. She taught us how to combine different flowers to create a harmonious beauty. "Every flower has its unique angle," she said, adjusting a stem in my hand. "Find the way that best displays its beauty, instead of forcing it to fit the vase." My nose suddenly tingled. At 63 years old, for the first time, I was learning how not to twist myself to fit into a vase designed by someone else. Back in my room, I had 3 missed calls on my phone, all from Daniel. There was also a text message. "Mom, why aren't you answering the phone?" "We're at the hotel. Leo says he misses you." I didn't reply. I just put the phone on silent and placed it in a drawer. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled like stars. It was the first night of my new life. Surprisingly, I slept soundly. Over the next few days, I was busy adjusting to my new environment. The senior community was full of activities: calligraphy classes, a choir, a book club. I even signed up for a smartphone class, determined not to be the old-fashioned woman who didn't even know how to use Uber. The Miami sun seemed to have given my son's family a healthy tan. They returned to the apartment complex on the 5th day at noon, dragging their suitcases, full of joy and fatigue. I was sitting on the balcony of my new apartment, trimming a newly bought pothos plant, when my phone suddenly vibrated. The screen flashed with the word "son." I put down the scissors and counted the vibrations. On the 7th one, the call ended. Immediately after, a call came from my daughter-in-law, Lauren. I didn't answer that one either. The third call was from Mr. Henderson. This time, I swiped to answer. "Eleanor," Mr. Henderson's voice was low. "Your son and his family are back. They're at the door of their old home and found that the key doesn't work. They're very upset." I gently stroked the leaves of the pothos. "Have the new owners arrived?" "They have. They're trying to talk to them now." "But, Eleanor," Mr. Henderson hesitated, "your son is threatening to call the police, saying someone is illegally occupying his property." I laughed. "The title deed is in black and white, and the transfer paperwork is complete. What kind of police report is he going to file?" "I know, but—" I could hear muffled shouting in the background. Mr. Henderson said hurriedly, "They're heading to the community office now. Do you want to—" "Give them my address," I said calmly. "It's time to face this." After hanging up, I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. 63 years had carved lines on my face, but my eyes were brighter and more spirited than ever before. I straightened my collar and went back to the living room to wait. An hour later, the doorbell of my senior apartment rang. Through the peephole, I saw my son Daniel standing outside, his face ashen. Beside him was my daughter-in-law, Lauren, her face contorted with anger, and my grandson Leo, clutching a toy car, looking bewildered. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Mom!" Daniel's voice boomed into the room like thunder. "Are you crazy? Selling the apartment? That was our home." I stepped aside to let them in, then knelt down and smiled at Leo. "Sweetheart, Grandma has some new building blocks in her room. Why don't you go play?" Leo glanced timidly at his parents and, after getting a silent nod, ran to the bedroom. "Mom, what on earth is going on?" Lauren's voice was shrill and piercing. "We come home, the lock is changed, and a bunch of strangers are moving furniture inside, claiming the apartment is theirs. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" I walked to the coffee table and poured them each a glass of water. "Sit down. It's tiring to talk while standing." "Sit? What is there to sit for?" Daniel slammed his fist against the wall. "You sold our home without saying a word and moved into this nursing home. Do you know what the neighbors are going to say about me? That I mistreat my mother, that I kicked my own mom out." I lifted my eyes to meet my son's. "Isn't it true?" Daniel looked as if he had been choked, his face turning from red to white. "Mom, what are you talking about? When did we ever mistreat you? Locking me in the house while you go on vacation, is that not mistreatment?" I asked softly. "Or is it that in your eyes, a 63-year-old person no longer deserves to be free?" Lauren interjected. "Mom, we did that for your own good. The weather in Miami is hot and there's so much walking. We were worried about your health." "Lauren." I cut her off. "You saw my medical report from last week, didn't you? Aside from mild cataracts, all my health indicators are better than Daniel's." I turned to my son. "You weren't afraid I would get tired. You were annoyed that I would be in the way." The room fell silent. Daniel's Adam's apple bobbed up and down, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. "Your father and I saved up to buy that apartment. The title is in my name only," I continued. "For the past 20 years, I've helped you with your down payment, wedding expenses, and raising your son. I never kept a tally. Now, I want to live somewhere else. Is there a problem with that?" A huge problem. Daniel suddenly exploded. That was our home. Leo grew up there. All his memories are there. What right do you have to sell it on your own? I quietly watched my son's hysterical display and suddenly felt he was a stranger. When did the little boy who used to pull on my clothes, begging for candy, turn into this raging adult before me? Did you have a good time in Miami? I asked suddenly. Daniel froze. What? A 5-day, 4-night luxury trip. The pictures on your social media were beautiful. I walked to the desk and picked up a folder. This is the sales contract and the transfer documents. The apartment sold for $400,000. After deducting the cost of this apartment, the rest is more than enough for my retirement. Lauren's eyes were glued to the folder, and her voice suddenly softened. Mom, let's talk this over calmly. If you weren't comfortable living at home, we could have renovated. There's no need. I shook my head. I'm very happy here. There are activities every day, people my own age to talk to, and medical staff on call. I paused. By the way, I'm having cataract surgery next week. I've already scheduled an appointment with a specialist. Daniel's expression froze. Surgery? What surgery? Mild cataracts. I told you about it, I said with a small smile. But you were busy booking your tickets to Miami at the time. You probably weren't paying attention. The color drained from my son's face. He opened his mouth but couldn't speak. Lauren quickly tried to smooth things over. Mom, why didn't you tell us about something so important? If Daniel had known, he definitely wouldn't have let you go through it alone. Alone? What's wrong with being alone? I retorted. Haven't I arranged everything perfectly? I'm paying for the surgery myself, and I've already hired a post-op caregiver. You're busy with work. You don't need to worry about it. Leo peeked his head out of the bedroom. Grandma, I finished my castle. The severity on my face melted instantly. That's wonderful. Grandma will be right in to see. I turned back to my son and daughter-in-law, my expression calm again. That's all for today. The new owners should have packed up your personal belongings and left them with the building management. You can get them from Mr. Henderson. Mom? Daniel finally found his voice. You can't do this. We're a family. Yes, a family, I repeated softly. That's why when you went on vacation, you locked your family member in the house. As I showed them to the door, Leo clung to my leg, refusing to let go. Grandma, I want to live with you. Lauren roughly pulled the child away. Don't make a scene. Grandma doesn't want us anymore. Let's go. Closing the door, I leaned against it and slowly slid to the floor. It felt like a piece of my chest had been carved out, but strangely, it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Perhaps that space had been empty for a long time, and I had only just noticed it today. The turmoil over selling the apartment was like a stone dropped into a calm lake, its ripples spreading wider and wider. The next morning, Mr. Henderson called. He said my son and daughter-in-law had caused a huge scene at the community office, demanding that the management intervene and uphold justice. Eleanor, they're insisting on a family mediation meeting, Mr. Henderson said, his voice laced with exhaustion. What do you think? Let's have it, I said calmly. As it happens, I have some things to say as well. The mediation was scheduled for 3 o'clock that afternoon. I arrived at the community office half an hour early and found my son's family already there, along with a few community staff members I didn't recognize. When Daniel saw me enter, he immediately stood up. Mom, you've finally come to your senses. Let's go home and talk properly. I'm not here to talk about going home, I said, taking a thick notebook out of my bag. I'm here to make things clear. Mr. Henderson motioned for everyone to sit, and the mediation officially began. He gave a brief overview of the situation, then looked at Daniel. Mr. Chen, is there anything you'd like to say? Daniel immediately launched into a lengthy speech, starting with his good intentions for the Miami trip, moving on to my irresponsible act of suddenly selling the apartment, and ending with how dedicated a son he had been. I listened quietly, my pen tapping lightly on my notebook. In short, my mother is getting older. She's acting impulsively without considering the consequences, Daniel concluded. I request the community's assistance in getting my mother to move back home, or at the very least, to hand over the proceeds from the sale for me to manage, to ensure her well-being in her old age. I almost laughed out loud. Ensure my well-being. He didn't even know I needed cataract surgery. Eleanor, do you have anything to say? Mr. Henderson turned to me. I opened my notebook. This is my ledger from the past 5 years. Every penny I've given to my son's family is recorded here. The room suddenly fell silent. I read out the numbers clearly. March 2018, $20,000 for my grandson's kindergarten enrollment fee. June 2018, a $50,000 loan for my son's new car. Chinese New Year 2019, a $12,000 gold bracelet for my daughter-in-law. August 2019, $15,000 for my grandson's early education classes. January 2020, a $30,000 subsidy for my son's mortgage. As the numbers tumbled out, Daniel's face grew increasingly pale. Lauren shifted uncomfortably in her seat. In the past 5 years, I have supported my son's family with a total of $55,000, I said, closing the notebook. And that doesn't include the daily help with childcare, housework, or the various gifts for holidays and festivals. Mom, Daniel interrupted, we never forced you to give us that money. You did it voluntarily. Yes, voluntarily, I nodded. Because I thought my sacrifices would earn me affection. But I was wrong. The atmosphere in the room froze. An older mediator spoke up. Eleanor, what were your reasons for selling the apartment? 2 reasons, I said, holding up 2 fingers. First, I need the money for my cataract surgery and future care. Second, I looked at my son. I wanted to see if my son would still remember he has a mother when I'm no longer a readily available ATM and a free on-call babysitter. Lauren suddenly burst into tears. Mom, that's so hurtful. We've always been so good to you. Good to me? I took out my phone and opened the photo album. This is a picture I took from the balcony on the day you left for Miami. I slid the phone to the center of the table. Look at the backs of the 3 of you. Did anyone even glance back at the 5th floor window? The photo showed the 3 of them walking cheerfully toward the complex gate, without a hint of reluctance. Locking me in the house, is that being good to me? Taking almost $40,000 over 5 years but not even remembering my cataracts, is that being good to me? My voice started to tremble. I'm 63 years old. How many more years do I have? I want to spend my final days not being treated like a burden and an ATM. Is that so wrong? Daniel shot up from his chair, its legs scraping harshly against the floor. That's enough. You're just angry we didn't take you on vacation, aren't you? Is that why you're making such a big deal out of this? Fine. You want to be independent? Then don't come to me when you need something in the future. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Lauren hurried after him, leaving a bewildered Leo behind. I walked over and picked up my grandson, whispering softly, Don't be scared, sweetie. Mommy and Daddy will be back soon. The mediators looked at each other awkwardly. Mister? Henderson sighed. Eleanor, what are your plans now? To continue my new life, I said, handing Leo to Lauren, who had come back in. I took a document from my bag. This is a notarized copy of my will. My savings are divided into 3 parts. 1 for my own retirement and medical care, 1 for my grandson's education fund, and the last part will be donated to the community's senior activity center. Mr. Henderson took the document, looking at me in surprise. Don't worry, I didn't leave a single penny for Daniel, I said with a smile. He's already taken enough from me. Walking out of the community office, the sun was setting. I took a deep breath and started walking slowly toward the bus stop. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. Lauren was catching up, out of breath. Mom, wait. I turned around and saw she was holding a medicine bottle. I found this in Leo's backpack. It has your name on it. I took the bottle. It was the blood pressure medication my doctor had prescribed. I'd been so busy with the move, I had completely forgotten to bring it. Thank you, I said curtly and turned to leave. But Lauren blocked my way. Mom, Daniel. He was just angry. You know he has a short temper. Lauren, I interrupted her. Do you know why I suddenly decided to sell the apartment? She shook her head. The day I was locked in, I called Daniel. I wanted to tell him that my vision had been blurry recently. I gave a bitter laugh. He hung up on me and sent a text saying, Mom, I'm busy booking flights. We'll talk tonight. That night, He never even came home. The color drained from Lauren's face. Mom, we really didn't know about your eyes. It doesn't matter anymore, I said, waving my hand. The bus is here. I have to go. After getting on the bus, I looked out the window and saw Lauren still standing there, her expression complicated. I knew what she was thinking. Without her mother-in-law's financial support, how would they manage their $2,000 monthly mortgage? What about Leo's tuition for private school? And the loan for that Lexus? These had once been my problems. Now, finally, they were just theirs. The mornings at the senior community began with the soft sound of footsteps in the hallway. Caregivers made their rounds, checking on each resident to ensure they had passed the night safely. I usually woke up at 6, and after washing up, I would go for a walk in the small garden downstairs. A week had passed since the uproar over selling the apartment. My son and his family hadn't contacted me. However, Mr. Henderson from the community office called frequently to check in, even mentioning plans to organize joint activities between the senior community and the neighborhood. Today was the day of my scheduled cataract surgery. I had prepared my hospital bag early and was sitting on the edge of my bed, waiting for my caregiver, Mrs. Davis, to pick me up. My phone suddenly rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Hello? I answered cautiously. Mom, it was Daniel's voice, hoarse and low. I'm downstairs at your apartment building. Can I come up? I walked to the window and, sure enough, saw my son standing by the flower bed downstairs, holding a fruit basket. He looked haggard after just 1 week, his suit wrinkled and his hair unkempt. Come on up. Apartment 502, I replied curtly. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Daniel standing outside, his gaze shifting nervously. Mom, I brought you some fruit. Come in, I said, stepping aside. But I have to leave for the hospital soon. Mrs. Davis will be here any minute. Daniel placed the fruit basket on the coffee table and stood there awkwardly. Mom, I came today to apologize. I didn't say anything, continuing to pack the items for my hospital stay. That day at the community office, I was too impulsive, Daniel said, wringing his hands. I went home and did some research. Cataract surgery may not be a major operation, but for seniors there are still risks. I should have. Should have what? I stopped what I was doing. Should have accompanied me to the hospital, or should have noticed earlier that there was something wrong with my eyes. Daniel's face flushed. Both. I know I was wrong. I've been thinking a lot lately. You've done so much for us, and we treated you like an ATM and a free maid. I finished his sentence for him. Daniel, do you know what hurt me the most? It wasn't that you went on vacation without me. It was the lack of hesitation when you locked the door. In your minds, I was no longer a whole person, but an object that needed to be properly stored away. My son stood there as if struck by lightning, tears suddenly welling up in his eyes. Mom, The doorbell rang again. Mrs. Davis's cheerful voice came from outside. Eleanor, are you ready? The car is waiting downstairs. I picked up my bag. I have to go, I said to my son. Thank you for coming to see me today. Daniel grabbed my wrist. Mom, let me take you to the hospital. I took the day off, specifically for this. There's no need. I gently pulled my hand away. Mrs. Davis will take care of me. You should go back to work. As we went downstairs, Daniel stubbornly followed behind, insisting on carrying my bag. Before I got in the car, he suddenly thrust an envelope into my hand. Mom, this is a little something from me. For the surgery. I pushed the envelope away. The money from the sale of the apartment is more than enough. You should keep this to pay your mortgage. The car window slowly rolled up, blurring Daniel's face. Mrs. Davis remarked from the side, Eleanor, your son is so devoted, coming all this way to see you. I smiled but said nothing. Devoted? Perhaps. But some cracks, once formed, cannot be mended with just a fruit basket and a few words of apology. Everything at the hospital went smoothly. The surgery was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. As I was being wheeled into the prep room, a nurse asked in surprise, Ma'am, you don't have any family with you? No, I replied calmly. I'll sign all the papers myself. The surgery was a success. When I woke from the anesthesia, the first thing I saw was the sunset outside the hospital room window. The world was still covered in a thin veil, but it was already much clearer than before the surgery. A nurse came in to check on me. "Ma'am, how are you feeling? Do you have a family member's contact information? We can let them know the surgery is over." I shook my head. There's no need to inform anyone. But to my surprise, around 8 o'clock that evening, the door to my room was gently pushed open. Lauren walked in with Leo, carrying a thermos. "Mom," Lauren said softly, "we came to see you. I made some fish soup. You should have some while it's hot." Leo rushed to my bedside. "Grandma, do your eyes hurt? Let me blow on them for you." I looked at them in astonishment. "How did you know I was at this hospital?" "Daniel checked your appointment records," Lauren said, pouring a bowl of soup for me. "He was supposed to come too, but he got called into work for an emergency." I took the bowl. Through the steam, I saw the dark circles under Lauren's eyes and the worried look on Leo's face. The soup was delicious, clearly having been simmered for a long time. "Grandma," Leo whispered in my ear, "Daddy's been really sad these past few days. He gets up in the middle of the night to smoke, and he even cried." My hand trembled, nearly spilling the soup. In my memory, the only time Daniel had ever cried was when his father passed away. Lauren had obviously heard the child. "Mom," she explained awkwardly, "Daniel really knows he was wrong. He's barely slept this week. He's been looking up information on cataracts and even went to the community office to ask about seniors' rights." "Lauren," I put down the soup bowl. "Did you come today because you're concerned about me? Or because of the money from the sale of the apartment?" Lauren's face turned pale instantly. "Mom, how could you think that?" "I'm just kidding," I said, patting her hand. "Thank you for the soup." They stayed until the end of visiting hours. Before leaving, Lauren asked hesitantly, "Mom, after you're discharged, would you like to stay with us for a few days? It would be easier for us to take care of you." "No, thank you." I shook my head. "The community has medical staff on duty 24/7. It's more convenient than being at home." Seeing the disappointment on my daughter-in-law's face, I added, "But you can bring Leo to visit me on the weekends. The doctor said I should look at a lot of green plants during my recovery, so I'm planning to grow some flowers on the balcony." Lauren's eyes lit up. "Okay, I'll definitely bring him. Daniel, too." "Let him be," I said coolly. "He can come or not." During my 3-day hospital stay, Daniel came every day after work, sometimes with fruit, sometimes with home-cooked meals. He no longer mentioned the sale of the apartment, but instead asked the doctor detailed questions about my recovery, even taking notes. On the day of my discharge, he was waiting at the hospital entrance early in the morning, insisting on driving me back to the community. "Mom, I did some research. You need to avoid strong light after cataract surgery." He took out a pair of sunglasses. "I bought these for you." I put on the sunglasses, and the world turned a soft shade of brown. Daniel carefully helped me into the car, his movements as gentle as if he were handling a fragile object. On the way back to the community, he suddenly said, "Mom, Lauren and I talked it over. We'd like to give you $500 a month for living expenses." I looked at him in surprise. "There's no need. I have my pension. Please, you must accept it." Daniel's voice was a little choked. "It's not about the money. I just want to do what a son should do." I didn't refuse again, not because I needed the money, but because I saw a long-lost sincerity in my son's eyes. Back at the community, Margaret and a few other old friends were waiting for me in the lobby. Seeing Daniel helping me in, they all smiled with relief. "Eleanor, your son is so devoted," Margaret said loudly. "He's been running to the hospital every day." Daniel's ears turned red. After seeing me to my room, he awkwardly helped me unpack, then stood at the door, hesitating. "Mum, go home. Lauren and Leo are waiting for you," I said gently. "Thank you for taking care of me these past few days." He nodded and turned to leave, then suddenly turned back. "Mom, Leo's school is having a family day next week. Would you like to go with me?" I looked at his expectant eyes and nodded. "Okay." A smile instantly bloomed on Daniel's face, like a child who had just been given candy. "It's a date then. I'll come pick you up." Closing the door, I walked to the balcony and watched my son's departing figure. This time, when he reached the complex gate, he looked back at my window and even waved. I sighed softly. Perhaps some cracks, once healed, can be mended, but it takes time, patience, and most importantly, sincerity from both sides. The day of the family event was bright and sunny. I woke up early and put on a new light blue blouse and beige trousers I had bought. After the cataract surgery, the world had become clear again, and even my mood had brightened. Daniel arrived at 9 o'clock sharp. He was wearing a casual polo shirt and jeans, looking much younger than when he was dressed for work. Seeing me come out, he hurried over. "Mom, you look great today. How are your eyes recovering?" "Much better," I replied with a smile. "The doctor says I'll be fully recovered after another week of rest." In the car, Daniel chattered on about Leo's recent achievements at school, how smart he was, and how much his teachers liked him. I listened quietly, occasionally chiming in. This kind of ordinary mother-son conversation felt so precious to us now. Leo's school was one of the city's top elementary schools, with a spacious and clean campus. When we arrived, the playground was already set up with various activity stations, filled with laughter and cheerful voices. "Grandma, Dad." Leo rushed out from the crowd and hugged my legs. "You're finally here. My class is performing, and I'm the lead singer." I knelt down and straightened my grandson's crooked tie. "That's wonderful. Grandma will be watching very carefully." During the event, Daniel stayed by my side, constantly asking if I needed to rest, if I was thirsty, or if the sun was too strong. This excessive concern was both touching and a little amusing. "Daniel," I finally couldn't help but say, "I just had eye surgery. I don't have a terminal illness. You don't have to be so nervous." He scratched his head awkwardly. "Mom, I'm just worried you'll get tired." "Grandma, Dad, come look." Leo waved to us from the stage. "We're about to perform." The performance was wonderful. Leo stood in the front row, his voice loud and clear as he led the song. I held up my phone and recorded the whole thing. Daniel was secretly wiping away tears beside me, turning his head away in embarrassment when he noticed I saw him. After the performance was the parent-child games. There was a 3-generation relay race that required a child, a parent, and a grandparent to participate. "Dad, let's do it." Leo jumped excitedly. "You and I can run, and Grandma can be the judge." Daniel knelt down. "Grandma's eyes just healed. She can't do any strenuous exercise, just the two of us will participate." Seeing the disappointment on my grandson's face, I suddenly said, "It's okay, Grandma can join. It's just a little bit of walking." Daniel looked at me in surprise. "Mom, are you sure?" the doctor said. "The doctor said to get a moderate amount of exercise." I stood up. "Let's go. Don't let Leo be disappointed." In the relay race, our 3-generation team drew a lot of attention. Leo was the first leg, and he shot off like a little rocket. I was the second leg, walking as fast as I could. Daniel was the last leg, finishing the race like an arrow released from a bow. We ended up winning 3rd place, and Leo was jumping for joy. When we went to receive our prize, Daniel insisted that I stand in the middle. He and Leo flanked me, putting their arms around me as the photographer took our picture. "Grandma's the best." Leo kissed my cheek. "We have to race together again next time." After the event, Daniel suggested we go to a nearby restaurant for dinner. He chose a quiet Italian place and ordered many soft, easy-to-digest dishes, clearly considering my preferences. During the meal, Leo chattered endlessly, and Daniel kept putting food on my plate. I hadn't experienced this feeling of being surrounded by family in a long time. "Mom," Daniel suddenly put down his chopsticks, his expression serious. "There's something I want to discuss with you." My heart tightened, instinctively thinking he might bring up the past. But to my surprise, Daniel said, "Lauren and I were thinking of asking you to come over for dinner once a week, Saturday or Sunday, whichever is more convenient for you." I looked at him, surprised. "Just that?" And also, Daniel wrung his hands. "Leo wants to learn the piano. We're planning to sign him up for lessons. You used to be a music teacher, right? Could you maybe guide him a little?" My nose suddenly tingled. For so many years, Daniel had almost never mentioned my past, my profession, my talents. In his eyes, I seemed to have only been a mother, not an independent individual with dreams and a career of my own. Yes, I nodded. I'd be happy to. On the way back to the community, Daniel drove with extra care, slowing down in advance for any bumpy sections of the road. Leo had fallen asleep in the back seat, and the car was quiet. "Mom," Daniel said softly, "I've been thinking about when I was a kid lately." "What about?" I asked curiously. "Remember when I had a high fever when I was 8, and you carried me on your back to the hospital?" Daniel's voice was a little choked. "It was pouring rain, and you wrapped me in your raincoat, but you were completely soaked." I was surprised he remembered that. "Why are you suddenly thinking about that?" "Because I realized," Daniel took a deep breath, "I have never loved you the way you loved me." His words were like a key that unlocked the deepest part of my heart. I turned my head to look out the window so my son wouldn't see my tears. When he dropped me off at the community, Daniel took a paper bag from the trunk. "Mom, this is for you." I opened it and saw it was the latest model of a smartphone. "You said last time you wanted to learn how to use a smartphone," Daniel said sheepishly. "I'm not a patient teacher, so I've already downloaded a few common apps and set it to a large font mode. You can explore it slowly. If you have any questions, just ask me anytime." I held the smooth case of the phone and said softly, "Thank you." "Oh, by the way," Daniel added, "next week is Lauren's birthday. I was hoping you could come over for dinner. Would that be convenient?" I nodded. "Yes, I'll be there." Watching my son's car drive away, I stood at the entrance of the community, feeling a long-lost sense of peace and warmth. Perhaps the bridges rebuilt after being broken are stronger than the original. Perhaps love is only truly cherished after experiencing the fear of loss. Back in my room, I turned on the new phone and found only one contact saved. "Son, Daniel." I smiled and dialed Margaret's number. "My dear old friend, how about you teach me how to video call tomorrow? I want to show my grandson the flowers I've planted." On the day of Lauren's birthday, I deliberately wore the navy blue silk blouse that was the last gift my husband had given me before he passed away. I sent a message to Daniel with my new phone, letting him know I would be on time. At the entrance of the senior community, Margaret stopped me. "Eleanor, are you really going?" she asked, frowning, still holding a watering can. "I promised the kids," I said, adjusting my collar. "What's wrong?" Margaret looked around and lowered her voice. "My daughter works at a bank. She said she's seen your daughter-in-law, Lauren, frequently checking on loan information lately." She hesitated. "Anyway, just be careful." I patted my old friend's hand. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." When Daniel came to pick me up, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes were more pronounced. His knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel. "Been busy at work lately?" I probed. "Huh?" "Oh, it's been okay," he said, as if suddenly snapping back to reality. "Mom, you look very energetic today." A strange silence filled the car. Daniel's phone kept vibrating, and each time he would quickly silence it, his expression growing more tense. My son's neighborhood was as neat and impressive as ever. In the elevator, Daniel suddenly said, "Mom, no matter what Lauren says today, please don't take it to heart." I was about to ask him what he meant when the elevator doors opened. Leo shot out like a little cannonball and hugged my legs. "Grandma, Mommy made a big cake." Lauren stood at the door, wearing a new red dress. Her makeup was exquisite, but her smile seemed a bit forced. "Mom, you're here. Please, come in." The dining table was laden with dishes, with a 2-tiered cream cake in the center. I noticed that a few of the dishes were clearly takeout, but I didn't say anything, simply handing the gift I brought to Lauren. "Happy birthday." Lauren took the gift box, her eyes lighting up. It was a solid gold bracelet, much thinner than the one I had given her before, but under the circumstances, it was the most I could offer. "Thank you, Mom," she said, eagerly putting it on and admiring it under the light. Daniel stood by, a complex expression on his face as he watched his wife. During dinner, Leo's constant chatter served as the best mood setter. Lauren kept putting food on my plate and asking about my eye recovery, her attentiveness feeling somewhat unnatural. "Mom," she suddenly changed the subject, "how much did you sell that apartment for again?" The air at the table instantly froze. Daniel slammed his chopsticks down. "Lauren, I was just asking," Lauren pouted. "Mom is living in a senior community now. She definitely won't need that much money. I slowly put down my bowl and looked directly into my daughter-in-law's eyes. It sold for $400,000. After buying this apartment and setting aside money for medical expenses, I put the rest in a fixed deposit. A flash of disappointment crossed Lauren's eyes, but she quickly put on a smile. "Mom, don't get me wrong. I was just concerned about you." "Lauren," I said calmly, "if you're having financial difficulties, you can just say so." "No. What difficulties could we have?" Lauren's voice suddenly rose, then she forced it back down. "Daniel makes a good salary. We're doing just fine." Daniel suddenly stood up. "I'll go cut the cake." After dinner, Lauren pulled me out to the balcony to look at the view, but it was really to talk in private. The night breeze was cool. She fiddled with her new gold bracelet and finally got to the point. "Mom, actually, there is a small problem," she said, biting her lip. "Leo is starting elementary school, and we want to send him to an international school, but the tuition—" "How much?" I asked directly. $15,000 a year, she quickly added. "Of course, we're not asking you to pay for all of it. We just need to borrow a little to get by." I looked at the distant city lights, remembering Margaret's warning. "Lauren, I remember when you got married, I gave you $40,000. When Daniel changed cars, I gave another $50,000. Since Leo was born, his early education classes, his hobby classes, which one of those did I not pay for?" The color drained from Lauren's face. "Mom, what are you trying to say? It's not like we won't pay you back." "That's the problem," I said, turning to face her. "You never have. It's not about the money. It's that you've taken my contributions for granted." The balcony door was suddenly pushed open. Daniel walked in with the cake. "Time for cake, Mom. I cut you the smallest piece, in case your blood sugar is high." He had clearly overheard part of the conversation. His eyes darted nervously. Lauren shot her husband a fierce glare and stormed back inside. On the way home, Daniel was unusually silent. It wasn't until the car stopped at the entrance of the senior community that he finally spoke. "Mom, Lauren's family is in some trouble. Her brother, he has a gambling debt." My heart sank. "How much?" "Over $50,000. Daniel's voice was hoarse. "My in-laws mortgaged their house, but they're still short $20,000. The creditors are showing up at their door every day." I took a deep breath. "So you want to use my money to fill this hole?" Daniel lowered his head in shame. "I was against it at first, but Lauren threatened to divorce me. Leo is still so young." "Daniel," I said wearily, "do you know what disappoints me the most? It's not that you need money. It's that you don't trust me. If you had told me the truth from the beginning—" "I was afraid you would look down on me," Daniel's voice choked, "unable to even solve my wife's brother's gambling debt. What kind of a man am I?" I looked at my son's pained expression and suddenly understood his pride and his vulnerability. For over 30 years, I had always treated him like a child who needed protection, forgetting that he also needed to be respected and trusted. "Bring the relevant documents to my apartment tomorrow," I finally said. "I want to see the promissory notes and loan agreements. If it's a legitimate debt, I can lend you the money. But for the loan shark part, I won't give a single cent." Daniel looked up in surprise. "Mom, remember, it's a loan, not a gift," I emphasized. "And your brother-in-law has to come see me himself. I want him to promise me, face to face, that he will stay away from gambling from now on." Tears welled up in my son's eyes. "Mom, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said, opening the car door. "I have conditions." Daniel looked at me nervously. "What conditions?" "First, you must create a repayment plan. Second," I paused, "you have to come have dinner with me once a week, without Lauren and Leo, just the two of us, mother and son." Daniel was stunned for a moment, then nodded vigorously. "I promise." Back at my apartment, I found Margaret still waiting for me in the lobby. Seeing me, she immediately came over. "How was it? Did they ask for money?" I briefly explained the situation. Margaret stomped her foot in anger. "And you just agreed? They treat you like an ATM, and they're still not satisfied?" "This time is different," I said calmly. "I'm making Daniel personally participate in the repayment plan. He needs to learn to take responsibility for his own choices." Margaret shook her head. You're just too soft-hearted." She suddenly lowered her voice. "By the way, I found out something about your husband, but we can talk about it after you've dealt with your family matters." My heart tightened. "What is it?" "It can wait," Margaret said mysteriously. "When you're ready." That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The moonlight shone on the photograph of my husband on the bedside table. His gentle smile seemed to be telling me something. I gently wiped the frame and murmured, "My dear, am I doing the right thing?" The next morning, Daniel arrived at my apartment with a stack of documents. His eyes were red and swollen. He clearly hadn't slept all night. "Mom, here are the copies of the loan agreements, and IOUs," he said, carefully handing them over. "I've already paid off the loan shark portion with my year-end bonus. The remaining $20,000 is a standard bank loan." I carefully reviewed the documents and, after confirming they were in order, nodded. "And your brother-in-law?" "He's downstairs. He's afraid to come up and see you," Daniel said shamefully. "Tell him to come up," I said, putting down the papers. "Otherwise, the deal is off." 10 minutes later, a young man in his early 20s stood before me, trembling. Lauren's brother, Kevin, was a far cry from the sunny, handsome young man in the photos. His eyes were sunken, and his fingers trembled uncontrollably. "Ma'am, I know I was wrong," he said, his head bowed, his voice as thin as a mosquito's buzz. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I poured him a cup of tea. "Sit." Kevin looked up, surprised by this unexpected opening. He sat down hesitantly, clutching the teacup as if it were a lifeline. "Tell me." I looked him straight in the eye. "When did you start gambling?" For the next 2 hours, I listened to a story that was both familiar and foreign. After graduating from college and struggling to find a good job, Kevin was introduced to an underground casino by a friend. It started with small bets, but he soon fell deeper and deeper into debt. I really wanted to quit," he said, painfully running his hands through his hair. "But every time I lost a little, I felt like I could win it all back. Do you know that because of you, your sister nearly ruined her own marriage?" I asked suddenly. Kevin shuddered, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry to my sister, to my parents." "Listen," I cut off his self-recrimination. "I can help you pay back the bank loan, but I have a few conditions." Kevin nodded eagerly, as if grasping at a lifeline. "Anything. I'll agree to any conditions. First, you will sign a written promise to stay away from gambling forever. Second, you will find a proper job, and 30% of your monthly salary will go towards repaying the debt. Third," I paused, "you will join a Gamblers Anonymous group and report your progress to me every week." Daniel looked at me in amazement. "Mom, how do you know about all this?" I didn't answer my son. Instead, I took a book from the shelf and handed it to Kevin. "Read this. Tell me what you think next week." After sending a grateful Kevin on his way, Daniel lingered, looking at me hesitantly. "Is there something else?" I asked. "Mom," he began with difficulty, "how do you know so much about gambling addiction?" I was silent for a long time before finally deciding to reveal the secret I had kept for 30 years. "Because of your father." Daniel looked as if he had been struck by lightning. "Dad? He also?" "Not gambling," I shook my head. "Investment addiction. During the stock market frenzy in the 90s, he invested all our savings and ended up losing everything." I walked to my desk and took out a yellowed notebook from the back of a drawer. This was his diary. "He never told you because he was afraid you would look down on him." Daniel's hands trembled as he took the notebook and opened its yellowed pages. As he read, his face grew paler and paler. "So, Dad's sudden illness back then was because of the stress from the debt, long-term insomnia, a weakened immune system. He felt most guilty before he passed away that he couldn't leave you anything," I said softly. Tears fell from Daniel's eyes onto the pages, blurring the old ink. "I always thought you were just being frugal, so that's why." "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to tarnish your memory of your father," I sighed. Looking back now, maybe that was a mistake. Daniel suddenly fell to his knees, hugging my legs and sobbing uncontrollably. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never knew you carried so much, and I was so selfish, so willful." I stroked my son's hair, just as I did when he was little. "Get up. It's all in the past. That evening, Daniel stayed for dinner at my apartment. We talked for a long time about his father, about the past, and about the inner struggles he had faced growing up that I had never known about. "Mom, I was always so jealous of Leo," he said suddenly. "You're so patient with him, you never get angry. But when I was a kid, you were always so strict." I was stunned. I was strict? Remember that time in elementary school when I failed a math test? "You didn't smile at me for a whole month," Daniel said with a bitter smile. "From then on, I swore I would make something of myself, so you would be proud of me." I looked at my son in shock, having no memory of this incident. In my mind, he had always been an excellent student, and I had always been proud of him. Had my strictness left such a deep scar on his heart? "Daniel, I apologize," I said, taking his hand. "But I swear, I never looked down on you because of your grades. If I made you feel that way, then my parenting was at fault." Mother and son looked at each other with tears in their eyes, the rift of many years seeming to melt away in that moment. Before he left, Daniel suddenly asked, "Mom, you know how to play the piano, right? Dad mentioned it in his diary." My heart skipped a beat. I learned when I was young, but I gave it up. Then Daniel hesitated. "Would you still be willing to teach Leo? Just like you helped Kevin, professionals doing professional things." I smiled. "Of course I'd be willing, but it depends on whether Leo is interested." "He's very interested." Daniel's eyes lit up. Just yesterday, he was begging me to sign him up for lessons. After seeing my son off, I stood on the balcony, looking at the starry sky. Margaret's words suddenly echoed in my ears. What was it about my husband? I decided to go ask her first thing in the morning. The next morning, I knocked on Margaret's door. She seemed to have been expecting me. 2 cups of steaming herbal tea were already on the table. "Sit," she said, pointing to the sofa, her expression unusually serious. I sat down and got straight to the point. "You said you found something about my husband." Margaret took a deep breath. "Eleanor, do you remember how your husband passed away?" "A sudden heart attack," I answered without hesitation. "March 14th, 1995, while working late at the office." "That's not right," Margaret interrupted. "My daughter was looking through old medical records and happened to find that the cause of your husband's death had been altered. The original record states that he fell from the hospital rooftop." My world suddenly spun. The teacup slipped from my hand, leaving a dark stain on the carpet. "No, that's impossible." My voice trembled uncontrollably. The hospital called and said. Margaret handed me a manila envelope. Inside were copies of the original files and the testimony of the nurse who was on duty at the time. "Your husband chose to take his own life after learning that his investments had failed." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. The cold medical terms and testimony stung my eyes. Fragments of memory from 30 years ago suddenly pieced themselves together. The hospital's vague phone call, the crumpled stock trading slip in my husband's suit pocket, and the strange bruises on his wrists. "Why? Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice choked with sobs. Margaret took my hand. "Because the way you helped Kevin was too professional. It wasn't something an ordinary person could do. I suspected there was more to your husband's story." I closed my eyes, letting the tears fall. Yes, after my husband's death, I had specifically studied addiction psychology, even getting a counselor's certificate just to understand his despair at the time. I later used this knowledge to help other families in the community with similar problems, but I never mentioned my reason for studying it. "Eleanor, did your husband leave you anything?" Margaret asked carefully. I opened my eyes and nodded. "A letter. He asked me to wait 10 years after his death to read it." I did. "And what did it say?" He said, I took a deep breath, that he had an illegitimate son, a mistake he made when he was young. The child should have been 15 years old at the time. Margaret gasped. "My goodness, you've known all this time?" "I've known, but I never went looking for him," I said, wiping my tears. I respected his last wish, and I didn't want to face it. A long silence filled the room. Outside, the cheerful music from the seniors' morning exercises contrasted sharply with our somber atmosphere. "Eleanor," Margaret finally broke the silence. "My daughter found out that the child is living in this city. He's a piano teacher named Julian. I looked up sharply. His last name? Yes, he took your husband's name. Margaret nodded. Do you want to meet him? I was torn. To meet him or not? For 28 years, this secret had been buried in the deepest corner of my heart. I need to think about it, I finally said. Margaret nodded understandingly. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Back in my own room, I took out a metal box from the back of my closet. Inside were my husband's belongings, his watch, fountain pen, wallet, and that yellowed letter. I gently stroked the familiar handwriting on the envelope, my thoughts in a turmoil. In the afternoon, Daniel brought Leo for his first piano lesson. I temporarily put aside my worries and focused on my grandson. Leo was fascinated by the electronic piano in the living room, his small hands randomly pressing the keys. "Grandma, this sounds so nice," he said excitedly. I smiled and adjusted his posture. "Here, Grandma will teach you a simple song." As my fingers touched the keys, a strange feeling washed over me. I hadn't touched a piano in over 20 years, but the muscle memory was still there. The melody of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star flowed smoothly from my fingertips. Leo clapped his hands in delight. "Grandma, you're so good. I want to learn too." For the next hour, I taught Leo to find middle C and some simple fingerings. He was a quick learner. Daniel sat by, his eyes filled with surprise and admiration. "Mom, I didn't know you could play so well," he remarked after the lesson. "I was in the music department in college," I said lightly, not mentioning how that part of my past was connected to his father. Daniel looked thoughtful. "Then why? Why did you stop playing?" "Life got in the way, I suppose." I finished his sentence. "After you were born, our expenses were high, and piano lessons were too expensive." My son's expression became complicated, as if he were truly understanding the sacrifices of our generation for the first time. After they left, I stood at the window, watching Daniel hold Leo's hand as they walked away. Suddenly, a thought struck me. What if my husband's other child had also grown up without a father's love, just like Daniel? I turned, picked up the phone, and dialed Margaret's number. "Help me arrange a meeting, but on one condition: don't tell him who I am at first." The meeting with Julian was arranged at a quiet coffee shop. I arrived half an hour early and chose a seat by the window, my fingers tapping restlessly on the table. Margaret came with me, but tactfully sat at a separate table. At 3 o'clock sharp, a slender, middle-aged man walked in. He was dressed in a simple white shirt and black trousers, his hair slightly curly. The resemblance in his eyes and brow to my young husband made me catch my breath. A waiter pointed him in my direction, and he nodded and walked over. "Hello, I'm Julian," he said, his voice gentle and polite. "I believe you wanted to inquire about piano lessons?" I forced myself to remain calm. "Yes, for my grandson," I said as he sat down. We talked about piano teaching for a while. Julian was knowledgeable and well-spoken, showing no signs of a troubled childhood. I couldn't help but probe. "Mr. Lin, you play so well. You must have started learning at a young age." "Yes, since I was 6, he smiled. "My mother was a music teacher." "And your father?" I asked carefully. A shadow passed over his face. "He passed away a long time ago. I barely remember him." My heart ached. "I'm sorry for bringing it up." "It's all right." He quickly regained his composure. "How old is your grandson? If he's a beginner, I would suggest—" The conversation continued, and I found myself increasingly drawn to this gentle, well-mannered stranger. He was patient, detailed, and had a unique approach to child education. Nothing like someone who had a traumatic childhood. Before we parted, I finally couldn't resist asking, "Mr. Lin, what was your father like?" Julian was taken aback for a moment, then gave a bitter smile. "To be honest, I don't really know. My mother rarely spoke of him, only that he had his reasons. It wasn't until just before she passed away that she told me my father had been secretly funding my education. That was the only time I felt that maybe he did love me." His words pierced my heart like a knife. My husband had indeed been setting aside a portion of his salary each month, claiming it was for investments. Now I understood. "Are you all right?" Julian asked with concern. I realized my vision had been blurred by tears. I'm fine, just thinking about some old memories. When we parted, we scheduled a time for me to bring Leo for a trial lesson. Julian politely held the door for me and even reminded me to watch my step. This stranger, who was connected to me by blood, was more considerate than my own son. Back at the senior community, I went straight to Margaret's room and told her about the meeting. "So, are you going to tell him?" Margaret asked. I shook my head. "Not yet. I want to get to know him better first." The next day was Saturday, and Daniel brought Leo for his piano lesson as promised. The child was making rapid progress and could already play a simple version of Ode to Joy. "Mom, you're such a good teacher," Daniel exclaimed. "You're as good as any professional." I hesitated for a moment before deciding to tell him. "Actually, I've found a professional piano teacher. Let's take Leo for a trial lesson next week." I gave Daniel Julian's contact information, but didn't explain our relationship. My son happily took it down, saying he would take Leo himself. On Sunday evening, my phone suddenly rang. It was Daniel, his voice frantic. "Mom, Leo has a high fever. We're on our way to the children's hospital. Lauren is out of town on business, and I'm all alone. Can you come?" Without a second thought, I grabbed my coat and ran out. Margaret saw me and immediately called a taxi to go with me. The emergency room at the children's hospital was packed. We found Daniel in a corner, holding a flushed Leo, looking completely helpless. "Mom," he exclaimed, relieved to see me. "His fever is 103 degrees. The doctor thinks it might be the flu." I touched my grandson's forehead. It was burning hot. But what worried me more was Daniel's panicked state. A man in his 30s, so helpless in the face of his child's fever. "Go ask the nurse if they have any cooling patches," I told Daniel, taking Leo from him. "I'll hold him." After Daniel rushed off, Margaret whispered, "Your son doesn't seem to have any emergency skills at all." I gave a bitter smile. He's been spoiled by Lauren and me his whole life. I gently wiped Leo's face and limbs with a wet wipe to help bring his temperature down. The child gradually quieted in my arms, his breathing becoming more regular. When Daniel returned with the cooling patches and saw that Leo was doing better, he let out a long sigh of relief. "Mom, you're amazing." "It's just basic knowledge," I said, motioning for him to sit. "When you had a fever as a child, this is how I took care of you." Daniel lowered his head in shame. I was so panicked. I didn't know what to do." "Because you've never had to," I said softly. "From childhood to adulthood, there's always been someone to solve your problems for you." My words seemed to flip a switch in Daniel. He suddenly burst into tears. "Mom, am I a failure? I rely on connections at work, on you and Lauren at home. I can't even handle it when my own son gets sick." I put my arm around my son's shoulders. "It's not too late. You can start learning now." We stayed at the hospital until dawn, until Leo's fever broke. Daniel insisted that Margaret and I go home to rest, saying he would stay with Leo. "I'll come relieve you tomorrow," I said. "You have to work." "No, I'm taking the day off," Daniel said firmly. "This is my responsibility." In the taxi on the way home, Margaret suddenly said, "Your son grew up a lot tonight." I looked out at the lightning sky and nodded. "Yes, he's finally growing up." After Leo recovered, Daniel seemed like a different person. He started to actively learn about childcare, even signing up for a parenting class. During our weekly mother-son time, he would share the new parenting tips and life skills he had learned. "Mom, you know what? I actually learned how to make pot roast," he announced excitedly one evening. I smiled and took a bite. "Not bad, just a little too much soy sauce." Kevin's debt problem was also gradually being resolved. On my advice, he joined a Gamblers Anonymous group and found a job as a delivery driver. On every repayment day, he would transfer a portion of his salary to Daniel on time. What pleased me most was that Daniel and Lauren's relationship also improved. Without the financial pressure, the two seemed to rediscover the warmth in their marriage. "Mom, thank you," Lauren said one weekend when she came to visit me alone, wearing the gold bracelet I had given her. "It wasn't just about the money. You helped Daniel learn to be responsible." I patted her hand. "We're family. We don't say these things." As my contact with Julian increased, I grew to like this gentle, well-mannered stranger more and more. He taught Leo the piano with patience and care, and the child's progress was remarkable. A month later, I decided to tell him the truth. After a lesson one day, I asked Julian to stay for tea. When I slid a photograph of my husband across the table to him, his expression went from confusion to shock, and finally to a complex silence. "So, you're my stepmother?" he asked with difficulty. "No, I am just your father's wife," I said softly. "Your mother. I only found out about her existence after she passed away." Julian's hands trembled, the water in his teacup rippling. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I think you have the right to know the whole truth," I said, taking out my husband's diary. "He wanted to acknowledge you, but he was afraid of hurting you and your mother. This conflict tormented him his whole life." Julian finished reading the diary, tears streaming down his face. We talked for the entire afternoon, about the past, about regrets, and about the man we had both loved. Finally, he took my hand. "Thank you for telling me this. It explains a lot." "Do you hate him?" I asked carefully. "I used to," he admitted honestly. "But now, I understand his struggle." Before he left, Julian hesitated for a moment. "Can I call you Aunt Eleanor from now on?" My eyes welled up. "Of course you can." This unexpected family member brought a new color to my life. I started playing the piano again, even joining the senior community's choir as an accompanist. Margaret said my playing had a new life to it. I think it was the wisdom that comes with age. Daniel's family came for dinner at the senior community every week. Watching my son awkwardly but earnestly help Lauren set the table, watching my grandson happily show off the new piano piece he had learned, and seeing the sincere smiles on my daughter-in-law's face, I felt a satisfaction I had never known before. One evening, as Daniel was staying behind to help me with the dishes, he suddenly said, "Mom, Lauren and I were talking. We'd like to ask you to move back in with us." My hands paused mid-air. "Why?" "I'm very happy here." "We know," Daniel said, drying his hands. "But we want to make up for the past. You being all alone." "Daniel," I interrupted him. "I'm not alone. I have friends, activities, and a life that I enjoy." I pointed to the brightly lit windows of the senior university across the way. "This is the right place for me." My son was silent for a moment, then finally nodded. "As long as you're happy. But promise me, if you need anything, you'll tell me right away." "Of course," I smiled. "Actually, there is something I need your help with right now." "What is it?" Daniel immediately tensed up. "The senior choir has a performance next month, and I'm the accompanist," I said with a wink. "I need you to record it for me." On the day of the performance, Daniel's whole family came. Even Kevin took the day off to be there. I was wearing a formal dress I hadn't worn in years, my fingers dancing across the piano keys. In the audience, my son held up a camera. My daughter-in-law and grandson applauded enthusiastically, and tears shone in Kevin's eyes. In the back row, Julian and Margaret sat together, giving me a thumbs up. When the last note faded, the applause was thunderous. I stood up and bowed, my gaze sweeping over every familiar face, family by blood, family by choice, old and young. These were all the important people in my life. After the performance, Daniel was the first to rush up and hug me. "Mom, you were amazing!" Leo squeezed in. "Grandma is the best pianist in the world." I kissed my grandson's cheek. "Grandma is just an amateur. The real pianist is over there," I said, looking at Julian in the crowd. That night, back at the senior community, I stood on the balcony, looking at the starry sky. My husband's photograph was on the bedside table, his smile as gentle as ever. "My dear," I whispered, "our two sons have finally met. They're both doing well. You can rest in peace now." The wind rustled the curtains, as if in response. I touched the wedding ring on my finger and then gently turned it, not to take it off, but to adjust it to a more comfortable position. At 63, I had finally learned to find the balance between love and independence, no longer an appendage to anyone, but also no longer rejecting sincere emotional connections. Just like the black and white keys on a piano, only when they exist in harmony can they create a beautiful melody.